Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Knowledge Bank. Today's webinar is being presented by Jodie Fraser and Shelley Jacobs, who are going to be speaking to you about supporting your well-being when working alone. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get through as many as possible at the end. The webinar is also being recorded today and will be available to watch back via our YouTube channel. I'm now going to hand you over to Jodie and Shelley.
Hi everyone, I'm Jodie Fraser. Thank you so much for being on this webinar this morning. We will go through many things. So if I just pop to the next slide. Next slide, please, caller. So I'm Jodie Fraser. I'm a property consultant, podcaster, mental health first aider, and I sit on the TPI Wellbeing Working Group.
Hi everyone, I'm Shelley Jacobs. I'm the Operations Director of managing agent called Michael Omega. We're based in Hertfordshire. I'm also a business psychologist, a cognitive behavioural coach, mental health first aider, and I also sit on TPI's Wellbeing Working Group, and it's lovely to be in your company this morning.
Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to talk about the challenges of lone working. We're going to talk about supporting lone workers, managing stress and a work-life balance, and creating a supportive work environment for everyone. Okay, so start with the challenges of lone working. We all have times when we have to work alone, whether that's site inspections, whether that's AGMs, evening meetings, directors meetings, all of that kind of fun stuff. So any situation obviously which we find ourselves in nearby when someone is working out of sight or out of earshot of another colleague, that is classed as what is a lone worker. So someone who works by themselves and even working one day a week, that constitutes you as a lone worker. So as I said, we're going to talk about the risks to lone workers as well. So a lot of things that we have to think about as lone workers are ultimately our stress and mental health. We have to also think about accidents and emergencies arising, not necessarily out of the work that we do, but we may have an accident, be that in the car, we may trips, falls, any of that stuff. Whilst we are out working, we could have a sudden illness, we could feel faint or sick or pass out or anything like that. Inadequate provision of rest, hygiene and welfare facilities are also a risk to us, and physical violence from members of the public. Now, obviously, when we're talking about that, we don't want to sit here and scare you, but you know, we do have to consider that, and we have to make sure that we are empowered enough in ourselves to protect ourselves from any physical violence, either from members of the public, intruders, leaseholders, tenants, contractors, anybody who we come into contact with. So lone workers in the UK, there's actually an estimated 8 million people who constitute lone workers in the UK, and 22% of the 31.2 million UK which is 22% of the 31.2 million people working in the UK are lone workers. And the reasons that we have ultimately for being a lone worker is there are fewer workplace distractions. Some of us like to just work at home. Some of us find that it's easier, we get more done. Some of us obviously like that social interaction, but you know, it can be distracting, so we like to be more alone in the jobs that we do. Less office politics, you know, we don't want to get pulled into the dramas of the workday, he said, she said conversations. So sometimes it helps if you've got a project, a budget or something like that you want to do. You don't have to deal with any of that drama, so you can just step away, and that makes you potentially vulnerable if you're on your own. Another reason is time and money saved on your commute. There are huge amounts of statistics around this, that you know, it makes us happier that we don't have to sit in the car for an hour or more, or sit on the train. You know, ultimately, if you did want to sit on the train and read a book, that's great, but most of us probably just sit there and play with our laptops and work and do emails. greater flexibility and autonomy and a better work-life balance. Personal or organisational preference. So as I said earlier, it may be that you prefer to work from home, or your organisation prefers that people work from home so they don't have to pay for office space as much as they did maybe pre-COVID, or they just find it works better for the team. And also it's a requirement of the role. You're just a home worker, or you're a lone worker, or you're just, you know, the company that you work for may be based in Newcastle and you live in Cornwall. You can still do the job, you can still do everything that you need to do, but obviously you don't have to be in the office every day, so therefore it's a requirement of the role. So a few scary statistics there. As I said earlier, I don't want to sit here and scare you, but we do need to think about it in order to protect ourselves. So how many lone workers are attacked in the UK? Daily attacks 123 to 205, which is crazy. Yearly attacks 44,850 to 74,750, and daily verbal abuse 159 to 266. Now bear in mind, these statistics are those that are reported. I'm sure there are many that go unreported. I'm sure we take, as property managers, we take daily abuse and we don't report it. But here's just some statistics of what people have to go through, I guess. And you know, just oh, Shell, is that your battery or mine?
Oh, mine, sorry.
It's all right. So yeah, so we yeah, it's just something that we wanted to put this slide in, not to scare you, but to give you the information so you feel that you know, information is power. So just knowledge is power. Make the most of the information that you've got to hand.
Scary numbers though on that slide.
It is some really scary numbers. So I just want to move on to employer responsibilities. So there are actually no specific laws that govern lone workers, which is really unfortunate because we haven't got a lot to fall back on when we want some change, or we want something to talk about or to bring to our employers, or anything like that. However, the related legislation for general safety is the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999, and unfortunately, Corporate Manslaughter Act 2007. So as an employer, failure to comply with legislation by protecting your employees can lead to legal costs, fines, loss of reputation, prosecution, imprisonment, or folding of the business. Now, as employers, we need to make sure that we take our responsibilities seriously when it comes to our employees, and making sure that we take lone workers, or responsibility to lone workers, for their, you know, their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being, into account, and using the legislation that you've got to hand, but also just being human beings and making sure that everybody feels protected. So moving on to employees' responsibilities, because as employees of companies, we also have to make sure that we're taking responsibility of our own well-being and our own safety, and making sure that we are doing everything that we can to look after ourselves. So take care of your own health and safety, and that of others who may be harmed by your actions at work. So don't do anything silly, obviously, or anything that could impact others. Cooperate with your employers and other workers, and ultimately help everyone meet their duties under the law. The biggest one here, I guess, as well, is to raise concerns with your employer or your manager if you have any worries. So if you're going out to site and you're a little bit worried about going by yourself, you've had a difficult conversation with the leaseholder, and you might not want to, you're worried about bumping into them, for example, make that concern known to your employer. If you work for a big company, obviously it doesn't have to be the CEO or anything like that. It can just be your direct line manager, but just make people know, or make people aware of the concerns that you might already have, and let people know your whereabouts as well. So, you know, this isn't about worrying about being checked up on, about what you're doing day to day. that sort of thing. I'm sure your employers all have complete confidence in you as to what you're doing, but letting people know your whereabouts keeps you as safe as possible. You know, you've got a site meeting booked in at this time, you've got a directors meeting booked in at this time. Just make sure that your diary is up to date as much as you can. And be vigilant with your own personal safety. You know, just keep an eye on things, keep an eye on your surroundings. You know, phone is safe and everything. So, you know, you don't draw attention to certain things. But yeah, just be vigilant with yourselves as well. So lone working risk assessments, you know, can risks be suitably controlled? Does the role cause any unnecessary stress? Think about your health as part of the risk assessment as well, and assess your own health. Are you physically capable of doing a certain role or a certain job that forms part of your overall job? And if you're not, that needs to be brought to the attention of your employer as well. Assess the work environment risks, ensure clarity of instructions. Violence, again, I really don't want to scare everyone, but assess the risk of threats or violence when you're going to site. And if you get to site and you're concerned about something, just leave, just walk away from the situation. A site visit can wait. You know, even if you're concerned about a director at a directors meeting, your safety comes first, and just walk away from the situation. And any special groups need to consider specific risks by, you know, any trainees or young people that you might have working in that environment. So there's quite a lot of technology out there that can be leveraged, I guess, when you're working alone. Smartphones and apps, there's tech that you can, you know, wearable tech. You've got these, you know, various things, smartwatches and remote alert buttons, and any cybersecurity you need to consider to protect your digital identity. There's things like multi-factor authentication, and all of the techie stuff that I don't know much about, really, and I'm pretty useless at explaining, but there's so much out there that can be used. So use technology to prevent harm, providing rapid response in emergencies if needed, and just use what you can to empower yourselves to protect yourselves. So anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge advocate for the Holly Gazzard Trust and the app that they have created. So it's called HollyGuard, and there's also a remote alert button that you can just attach to your collar or jacket or anything like that. So it is a free personal safety app. There is a paid version called HollyGuard Extra, which connects you to a 24/7 police approved contact center. There is within the app you can raise alerts. There's a meeting timer, so if you go into a meeting, you can start that meeting and end that meeting via the timer. Ultimately, if you don't end that meeting, an alert will automatically be raised, and that will go to your emergency contacts, or that will go to the contact center should you have HollyGuard Extra, and they will act accordingly. The journey function on the app is incredible as well. So you can, if you're leaving a meeting, for example, you can set the journey from the meeting to home. And if you don't reach home, then again, it alerts your contacts. And if you do raise an alert, the great thing about it is that it will automatically start recording audio and video, and it will send your GPS location to the person that you've got as your emergency contact. So that can be a loved one, that can be a friend, that can be your employer, that can be the police approved contact center if you have HollyGuard Extra. If you raise an alert to the contact center, they will answer within 8 to 10 seconds. They will have all of the evidence in front of them. They will be able to hear what's going on immediately. And they can make that call to the police, and the police will then take action. Sometimes the police don't get there as quickly as you would like, but the contact centre are still gathering all that information, and all of that information is therefore stored in the cloud as well, and it has been used in prosecution cases, or has been used to prosecute cases, I should say, and got convictions because of the evidence that's been provided in that app.
Yeah, it's an amazing app. So all of our property managers have it, and we obviously encourage them to use it when they go on site. So, and as Jodie mentioned, there is a free version, which is amazing. So utilize technology to support yourselves. It's a really great app. But moving on to think about actually how can we support ourselves potentially as lone workers, supporting each other, and thinking about how to manage stress and work-life balance, which, particularly for our lone workers, but for all of us as well. So when we think about working from home, there are tremendous benefits. Obviously, Jodie mentioned that if you're working from home at least 1 day a week, then you are a lone worker for 1 day a week, or for however long you are at home. So we need to think about the potential impact of that. For a lot of people, working from home improves our work-life balance. So 78% of people felt that their work-life balance was improved, and 47% of people felt that their well-being was improved through working from home. However, for some people, actually 9% of people felt that their work-life balance was reduced because actually they spend longer working than they do when they're in the office, although less commute time, all of the things that we've sort of discussed. And for some people, although 47%, as I say, had an improved sense of well-being working from home, some people, 19%, felt it was reduced. And there may be some underlying reasons for that. And I want us to look at two really key words: alone and lonely. They're not the most fun words to talk about on a Wednesday morning, but these words are important, and they're words that I think we don't use enough of. So what is the difference between being alone versus feeling lonely? There's a clue in there. So actually, being alone is a physical state of being on your own. But lonely is actually that emotional state. And really, when we think about loneliness, it's something that we don't really talk about. It's like, no one wants to admit that they feel lonely. But in reality, a lot of people do feel lonely. And actually, I think we should be talking about it, particularly in this sort of post-pandemic world. I think that the concept of loneliness is becoming more of a problem for society. So, when we think about things like relationship statistics, particularly in the UK, but globally as well, more people are staying single for longer, less people getting married, higher divorce rates. There's some challenges around that, lower birth rates globally. What is the world going to look like in sort of 10 years time, 20 years time, 50 years time? And actually, I think post-pandemic, a lot of people have just gotten used to spending time on their own. People are socializing less. The cost of living increases. It's expensive to go out for a night, so people are spending more time alone. And if we are spending more time alone, potentially there is more propensity for people to feel lonely. So what we need to think about in a work context, but also in a human context, is how do we actually manage that differently? How do we support people so that they don't feel lonely? So let's look at some slightly scary statistics. There was a recent study done, so it's research conducted by Nextdoor and the Marmalade Trust, that reported 85% of UK adults reported feelings of loneliness in 22 to 23. And I do think that number is going to increase. And like I say, I really believe that this is something that we should be talking more about. So actually, in a work context, we really need to consider how we can support lone workers so that they're not feeling lonely. because if we're feeling lonely, that's not great. And particularly if we don't want to admit that we're feeling lonely. So in a work context, then we want to obviously check in with people. You know, we did it a lot in the pandemic, but you know, that was 5 years ago now, which seems a little bit scary. But we still need to check in if you're working in a hybrid way, anyone that's working at home, then people need to be checked in on. It's important. It is really important. Obviously, getting together is important that lone workers feel that they are included in social activities and social gatherings. That may not always be possible, particularly, you know, Jodie mentioned if you're, I can't remember which way around it is, you're living in Newcastle and working in Cornwall or the other way around, you know, actually it might not be so straightforward to get together, but it's important to consider actually, are there ways in which we are unintentionally making lone workers feel excluded from social activities? And therefore, a potential way to manage that differently is to think about the virtual space as we are obviously conducting this through the magical powers of Zoom, you know, actually creating virtual communities and online spaces for social interaction. So actually what my company have done is we recently moved offices in January and we downsized because people are preferring to spend more time working from home, which is fine. As a business, we're happy to support that. So we've downsized, but then we realised that obviously we're lacking some social interaction and that virtual community. We also have property managers up north. So we wanted to sort of change it up a little bit. So we've started to do virtual coffee mornings. And actually, I have to admit, I wasn't quite sure how it was going to play out. I kind of imagined that we were all going to get on the screen and it was kind of like, oh, what are we going to talk about? But actually, genuinely, it was really nice. It was a really nice opportunity to kind of replicate that sort of water cooler banter moments that you don't necessarily have when you're working remotely. And people didn't have to come, you know, we did it for half an hour. And we kind of gave people a topic, you know, something to think about, you know, what was the worst thing that happened this week and the best thing, you know, something very simple that engaged everyone. And it was actually really, really nice. So we would encourage you to consider how you create virtual communities to support lone workers not feeling quite as lonely and quite as alone. So yeah, acknowledge people who are working remotely, acknowledge what they're doing, involve them in team activities, really focus on answering that question of, are you unintentionally making people feel excluded, and how can we make people feel more included in team activities? So thinking about lone workers, but also thinking about all of us, spotting signs of stress is really, really important, because particularly for lone workers, if all you see is their face on a screen, you know, it's very easy to be on a screen and be all jazz hands. You switch your Teams call off or Zoom call off, and you don't see what happens behind the scenes. So we have to invest more time in really focusing on, you know, what's going on and spotting those signs more so than if we were in a physical space with people. So one of the first things on that screen is false positivity. Now, a lot of people moan at me because I am just kind of a happy-go-lucky kind of a gal. I'm annoying like that. I just can't help myself. That's my personality, soz not soz. But if you have somebody who is kind of, you sense that they're being falsely kind of woo, actually that can be a sign of stress. We need to kind of pay a bit more attention to that. People not participating in meetings. Now, actually, I've conducted some research on how people participate in meetings. Not everyone likes to participate, and that's okay. But it's about paying attention to that a little bit more, particularly if you have somebody who might normally participate and then is perhaps a little bit quiet. We need to look a little bit harder at these things. Increased absenteeism, obviously, procrastination. We all put things off for all kinds of reasons. But if you spot in yourself or in someone else that someone else is just like putting off things, can be a sign of stress, missing deadlines. Increased errors, we all make mistakes. We're human. It's okay to make mistakes. But again, if you notice in yourself or when you notice in other people that they're making a lot of like silly mistakes, again, it can be a sign of stress. Emotional outbursts. The next point is interesting actually, and not something that people typically associate with stress, but it can be, and that's gossiping or moaning about others. Now, let's be honest, most of us like a good old moan about somebody, but if you're noticing that that's happening quite a lot, either again in yourself or other people, the reason why that potentially could be a sign of stress is that it's easier to focus on what someone else is doing than dealing with what we're personally dealing with. So again, it can actually be a sign of stress. And not managing work-life balance. So thinking about your organizations for a moment, do you have an organizational culture that celebrates working beyond your standard working hours? Actually, in my world, that's not a great thing. It's not something that should be encouraged. People need to manage their work-life balance better. So moving on to think about stress and how that affects performance. So the joke that I always say when I share this slide, because I just can't help myself, this model is often referred to as the arousal curve. And when I say arousal, I don't mean ooh la la arousal, because that's a whole different webinar. But when we look at this model, let me see if I can put my laser pointer on, bear with callers. We need an element of stress to work at our peak performance. If we are sort of bored, I don't know about you guys, but I would rather be busy than bored any day. If we're bored, that's not great either. What we want to have is an element of stress. Not all stress is bad, but where stress becomes bad is when the impact of stress starts creating disease. So we get into a state of burnout and breakdown, and that's where too much stress is not a good thing. We need an element of it, but not too much. So both Jodie and I have our stories to share about burnout. So I'm going to share with you a more recent story about burnout that affected me. So I was chatting to a therapist, and she was asking me about when I noticed that I hit burnout, because I feel like I'm in sort of borderline burnout a lot of the time. And I said, well, once I've been on holiday, I reckon it's probably about 3 months that I start getting into sort of burnout headspace. And she said to me, well, how do you know that that's what's happening? And I explained, well, my brain just kind of conks out and just stops working. And she said to me, well, if you notice that at month 3, that means that there are signs before your brain stops working. So, do you know what those signs are? And actually, to be honest, I really didn't. I think of myself as fairly self-aware, but I just wasn't really sure. And so I asked my friends and family, what have you noticed about me, that might help me to actually understand myself a little bit better? And they gave me some things, one of which is I get a bit lazy, I admit, and I stop doing my Tesco shop and I start having a few takeaways because I can't I don't have the mental energy to think about food shopping. It's just one of my things. And actually, what I realized through that process is that my sort of beginnings of burnout actually happened probably not at the 3-month mark, but probably close to the 6-week mark, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening, signs that I wasn't really aware of, that was indicating that I actually spend a lot of time in burnout. So I'm rethinking out my own strategy to manage that differently with that new bit of knowledge. So that's my kind of latest thoughts on my own burnout. But Jodie, do you want to share your burnout story?
Yeah, so mine ended up with quite a serious ending, really. So back in 2021 into 2022, work became so stressful, and I don't mean, oh God, I'm so stressed kind of stressful. I mean not sleeping, not eating, then overeating, then sleeping too much. Shelley mentioned about spotting signs of stress earlier. The false positivity. There was a mask on me at all times, basically I couldn't let the outside world know how stressed I was. I was getting poorly all the time, chest infections, heart palpitations, headaches. It was quite horrendous. I would procrastinate over things because I would think I'm not I'm not good enough to do it. I won't know how to do it. When actually, when I did it, it only took me about 5 minutes. So that was the annoying thing, that it, actually, if I just got on with it, I would have been fine. I was missing deadlines, increased errors, all of the things that Shelley mentioned earlier, and really not managing my work-life balance at all. And these things I actually didn't notice were happening to me. And I'm sure my friends and family did notice. They probably just thought, you know what, she's overworking, she's getting poorly all the time. But me being me, took it on the chin and just said, I'm fine, don't worry about me, everything's okay. But actually I wasn't okay, and I got really, really poorly at the end of 2022, started in the September. Basically I couldn't get rid of a chest infection. And that chest infection turned to pneumonia in November, and that pneumonia turned to sepsis. And end of November 2022, I was rushed to hospital and told that I had a 10% chance of surviving. Thankfully, I am here. However, that was a huge kick to me. I didn't realize I was in it. I just couldn't see. It sounds a little bit silly now, because as Shelley was mentioning just then, I'm spotting the signs of stress. I'm spotting the signs of burnout much quicker than I did before. But even at the point of being in the ambulance, I still couldn't see a way out of what I was trying to do, the business I was trying to run, the reputation I was trying to build. All of that stuff, all of that. I don't want to let the clients down. I don't want to let the staff down. I don't want to let my family down. But sorry, I can't speak. At any point did I think about myself, and I was constantly letting myself down. And at the end of that, it could have just resulted in my 3-year-old daughter at the time not having a mother. So, and a lot of that was based around being alone and not knowing who to reach out to and not knowing where to reach out. Thankfully, Shelley and I are very good friends now, and I can reach out to her, or I can reach out to many people in the industry and personally as well if I'm struggling. But I didn't feel like I could do that at the time. I just could not see a light at the end of that tunnel. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't feel like there was anybody there who could help me. And I'm trying not to get emotional, actually. How strange. But that's my burnout story. And I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. So that's why I do what I do. So that's me.
Thank you for sharing. And that's the thing, when we talk about lone working or being alone, when you are dealing with these kinds of things, that we all have elements of stress, but we don't always pay attention to ourselves. And it's that age-old thing of, when you ask people, hey, how you doing? And they say, yeah, I'm fine. It's paying attention, isn't it? To kind of, are they really fine? And actually, what we need to really think about is how we can be more supportive to other people, but also to ourselves. We both shared some stories about how we're both knowledgeable about these matters, and yet we have to work quite hard to manage our own sort of well-being, and as well, we're all humans at the end of the day. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is work-life balance. And actually, what does that look like? I'm going to share with you a little story. So about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I had a new member of staff join, one of my senior team leaders. And within a couple of weeks of them starting working for me, they said, Shelley, your staff are a bit weird. And I got a bit sort of protective, a bit, I'm a bit of a mama bear. And I said, how dare you say that about my staff? No, I didn't really say that, but that's what I thought. I said, well, what do you mean there's something weird about my staff? And he said, well, at 5:30, this is pre-COVID actually, at 5:30, they're all out the door. So they obviously don't care about the job that they do. And I said, well, that's not quite the case, actually, that culturally we encourage our staff to have good work-life balance. And actually, he wasn't used to that. He'd worked in an environment where, as I mentioned earlier, people were rewarded for staying late. That was viewed as a good thing. But when we think about work-life balance, actually, it is important to establish clear boundaries, define your working hours and stick to them where possible. The difficulty for many of you on this webinar or anyone that's watching this on the recording is that within block management is not always a 9 to 5 job. It is difficult. So in a way, it's almost more important to try to establish those boundaries so that when things happen, they are the exception to the rule, not the rule. So establish clear boundaries and stick to them. Think about your health and your well-being. Invest in your time to, take time for resting, exercise, planning annual leave throughout the year. So for me, with my own sort of burnout story, I realized actually I need to book more time off throughout the year. So I've just done that this year. That's my new thing. I'm taking more time off, and actually my brain is working so much better. It's a much better thing. Time for joy. I know it sounds fluffy, but think about space for hobbies, space for family, relaxing. Relaxing is not about binge watching box sets, not that there's anything wrong with that, but actually what do you do to rest your mind? And think about being productive without burning out. Learn to work smarter and not harder. So with that in mind, we're just going to have a few look at a few slides around that concept of working a little bit smarter, not harder, because we all work super hard. So I'm sure that many of you will agree that there are just not enough hours in the day. That's what it feels like. But my question and my challenge to you all is this. Actually, how much time do we waste? Human beings fundamentally waste a lot of time. And hopefully, I'm going to prove that to you shortly. So when we look at the next slide, we can see that these are increments of 5 minutes. So daily time wasting in increments of 5 minutes, and the yearly time wasting equivalent in working days. So when we think about this, if we look at that bottom number, 30 minutes of time wasting every day equates to over 3 weeks of work in a year. And when we think about wasting time and we think about 30 minutes, what might 30 minutes really look like? Well, 30 minutes could look like this. 3 minutes for a cup of tea, 5 minutes of personal email, 4 minutes of a little natter, another cup of tea if you're a tea girl like me, a bit of a WhatsApp chat, 5 minutes of a meeting that ran over, actually how many of your meetings overrun, probably a lot of them, another cup of tea. I'm not saying don't drink tea, by the way, drink tea, but time accumulates. Another natter, a bit of daydreaming. You can get to 30 minutes very, very quickly. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying don't drink tea. I'm not saying don't have a natter with people. Actually, social interactions are important. I'm not saying don't do any of these things, but what I am saying is to think about how you use your time and how you may waste bits of your time, because the minutes add up. So 30 minutes of time wasting every day equates to over 3 weeks of work in a year. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're going on holiday. We're coming into the holiday season. Hopefully for many of us, we get to go on holiday in the summer. And I guarantee you that most of you are more productive in the week before you go on annual leave than at any other time of the year. Why? Because you're focused in a different way. So my challenge to you is to think about how you spend your time. Think about the minutes that get wasted, because the minutes add up. Another thing to think about is prioritizing, and actually, whether we're lone working, whether we're working in the office, actually how we choose to spend our time can have an impact on our productivity. And if we're not getting through our work and we're not being productive, that's going to impact our stress and not feel great. So, two really key words on this slide: important and urgent. Now, for some of our leaseholders, everything is important and everything is urgent. But actually, it's our job to try and sort of unpack that a little bit. So when we prioritize, we need to consider something that is important will have a significant impact, and something that is urgent has something that's driving a deadline or something that's time bound in some way. So rather than prioritizing based on the person that shouts the loudest, which is something that we tend to do, let's think about that slightly differently. So this is a nice model that I use quite a lot. So something that has a fairly low priority is something that is not urgent, not important. So, low impact, nothing driving a deadline, versus something that truly has a high priority, it has a significant impact, and something is driving a deadline. And obviously, medium priorities are not urgent but important, or urgent but not important. So that's a really helpful way to really think about how we prioritize our time, to really think about how we can be more productive. Another thing which is very helpful for property managers in particular is a concept called time blocking. You may have heard of this. It's where you schedule your key work streams together and you block off time in your calendar. So most property managers have multiple streams of their job. How do you get all the bits of your job done? So I'm going to show you an example of time blocking. This is just an illustrative example. It's not to be taken too literally. But as a typical property manager role, you've got emails and phone calls coming in all the time. You've got site visits, authorising invoices, dealing with budgets, client reports, service charge accounts, a whole bunch of things. And actually, it's blocking off that time in your calendar and sticking to that hour to do that particular work stream. And actually, I've talked about this a lot over the last few years. I work with somebody who time blocks, and initially I was very skeptical about it because I was thinking, well, I work in a very reactive capacity, and I would just be forever moving things around. But actually, it does focus the mind. So have a think about it. Do factor in time for regular breaks, pre-meeting preparation, post-meeting actions, that sort of thing. So give it a go if you're not doing it already. A lot of my property managers are starting to use it. Maybe not 100% of their time, but some of their time, and are finding it very helpful. Moving
Okay.
on.
So I want to talk a little bit about creating a supportive work environment for everyone, and ultimately why our well-being at work is important. So employees need to feel psychologically safe and supported when they're doing their job. So I spoke earlier about the physical aspect of making sure that lone workers are physically protected, or to the best of our ability anyway. But we have to think about our emotional state, our psychological safety, and how we feel supported doing our jobs. And that enables people to thrive and be engaged in doing their job well, supporting leaseholders, supporting clients, supporting tenants, and supporting each other. Feeling supported at work also lowers employee turnover and absenteeism, and it produces greater productivity. And as the slide shows, a lovely cake there. I did not make it. You don't want to try one of my cakes; they're horrible. But all you need is this to make the well-being cake rise. So creating a culture of well-being. So decisions that centre around well-being, and design well-being programs with your employees. Talk to them about what they need. Talk to them about what makes them feel safe doing their job. And as I said, this isn't just about the physical safety. This is about what makes you feel safe in your soul to do your job, because well-being ultimately is a constant effort. I spoke about my burnout journey, and Shelley spoke about hers. It is a constant thinking about what you need, and communicating that with the people around you. And it isn't just about spending money. It's about a change of mindset within the company. You know, it isn't just about throwing the free gym memberships at employees and hoping that that does the job. That's great. You know, I'm not taking anything away from a gym membership. I'd rather a cup of tea and a piece of cake, but that's another story. But creating a culture of appreciation, showing your employees and showing the people that you're working with and your colleagues that you appreciate what they do. You know, if somebody, if you're struggling, for example, with something, and that difficult call comes in and somebody takes that on board and says, do you know what, either, you know, take a step away, I'll go make you a cup of tea, just take 5 minutes before you respond to that, or talking the problem through with somebody, and appreciating those efforts. Also an inclusive social activities, you know, making sure that everybody can be involved in the activity should they wish to do so, and add some fun activities into it, because humour can be a great medicine. And thinking then about our operational culture, I will move on to Shelley. Sorry, I've jumped in on your slide, Shelley. Apologies.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So thinking about culture, you know, all organizations have this is how we do it here thing, which is our culture. It's formed over time and requires effort to change. And I'm not saying that you necessarily need to change your culture, but as we're sort of surviving in from many organizations, a hybrid working model for many. I know there's a lot of people talking about going back to the office, but a lot of people are still working in that hybrid way. I think it's actually harder to sustain great culture when you're not seeing each other in the same way. And again, thinking about supporting lone workers, hybrid workers, etc. Culture is really important. I think organizational leaders need to set the tone, but also have to work a little bit harder. And so what we wanted to do is to just look at some examples of toxic work culture versus great culture, and for you guys to really think about your organizations and culturally, what does that look like and what potentially could be improved. So when we think about toxic culture, that word toxic is not very pleasant, I appreciate. And there's a lot on this slide. I'm going to try and zip through it quite quickly. When we're talking about toxic culture, we're talking about lots and lots of components that make up that sort of toxic culture environment. So poor communication, little or no feedback is really, you know, a sign of not a great culture. As Jodie mentioned, you know, creating a culture of appreciation is so important. So actually working in an environment where there's no positive recognition, maybe you're told off for the things that you've got wrong or the things that you're not doing, but you know, not being told well done or thank you for the things you are doing is not great. And it doesn't cost any money to say well done. It doesn't cost any money to say thank you. Yes, people get paid a salary, but there's so much more to human beings than just being paid a salary. We want to feel like we've contributed, that we're appreciated and valued. I mentioned earlier on about gossiping being a potential sign of stress, but it can also be a cultural thing within organizations. So gossip, bullying, or harassment, particularly in today's world where you've got things like team group chats, WhatsApp chats that exclude people. Those scenarios are not great culturally. Having a generally unsupportive culture, lack of trusting of your managers and leaders is not great. The blame culture, and I think in block management, it's very easy to have that blame culture. You know, property managers moaning about accounts people moaning about property managers. It's very easy for that to exist within our world of block management and property management. It's not great to have that. So as managers, any of you who are managers on the call, you know, we need to kind of stamp that out. Lots of moaning, you know, people like to moan, and there's lots to moan about, and particularly in today's world where people just have less tolerance for stuff, there's a lot of moaning. Fear of leaders is not great. You know, there are some people who naturally will always fear people in authority, regardless of who they are. But typically, if you have an organization where you fear the boss, that used to be considered back in the day like a good thing. But in today's world, not so much. Self-orientated leaders, so it's all about me. People feeling excluded or isolated, again, touching on that in terms of lone workers, poor work-life balance, fear used as a motivator. So if you don't do this, you're sacked. That's not great. And yeah, not helpful. And then different rules for different people, that idea around people being treated unfairly is not great culturally. So flipping that around then, something a bit more positive. What does great culture look like? Yes, it is kind of the reverse, but I'm going to go through it anyway. So great communication, two-way feedback, regular feedback in a positive way, in a supportive way, regular recognition, people just caring about each other. We need to kind of get back to being human. I think somewhere along the way that got a bit lost in translation. Just being supportive, nurturing people, helping people, trusting people. Employee voice is a really important one. Within your organization, what you want to have is that open door policy. People can share their views. And that those views are listened to. You can't always action everything that people want, but certainly listening and actioning where you can. Work-life balance encouraged, people feel included, people are treated fairly and respectfully. Again, that costs nothing. Having autonomy, so in other words, people feeling like they're working in a self-directed way is super, super important. Again, one of the reasons why a lot of people during COVID liked working from home is that they felt that greater sense of autonomy, that greater sense of being self-directed in the way that they work. Jodie mentioned psychological safety. So we want to exist in a work environment where it is okay to make mistakes. And, we all make mistakes. It's important that people feel like they're not going to lose their job, because they misspelt a word or something. And ultimately, what we want to foster within work environments is that sense of togetherness and that people feel like they belong. So that's really what great work culture looks like. But I'm going to hand you back to Jodie for the final slide.
Okay, so what I want you to take from this really is to understand the risks of lone working and making sure that we understand what we need as people and as humans, and as employers, what do our staff need? What do we need to do to make sure that everybody feels that they feel empowered enough ultimately to protect themselves, but also to feel comfortable in their environments, and comfortable and supported in their workplaces, and just be more vigilant and support lone workers' physical and mental health. We want to work smarter and not harder, and tech will obviously help with that a lot. And I do like the time blocking. I fail a little bit with it sometimes, but it is a great tool. So thanks for introducing us to that, Shelley, and to consider our organisational culture and how that could be improved. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody. So if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, ladies. That was great. It was really interesting. I'm just trying to see, there's no questions at the moment, but if anyone has any that they would like to submit for Jodie or Shelley, if you want to do so now. Just give it a minute. If there's none, then I'm pretty sure you've answered everything already. Okay. Marie Rose just said that she would like to say thank you. That's lovely.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it there if there's no questions. As I said earlier, the webinar has been recorded, so if you'd like to watch it back to go through anything that Jodie and Shelley have covered, then you can do so on the News on the Block YouTube. Otherwise, thank you both very much for your time today and sharing everything that you've gone through with our listeners. If you want to join us for our next webinar, it will be on EV charging for multi-unit buildings on the 3rd of June. Otherwise, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you on the next one.
Thanks so much,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.